School, our annual sports summit. If you weren't with us this morning, it's been action-packed. At 9 o'clock, we had a great panel of sports media practitioners, great Manship alums like Mr. Mark Grant, CBS Sports lead director for NFL football and the Final Four, Mr. Matt Moscona from ESPN Radio Baton Rouge, of course, has been instrumental in a lot of mainstream media coverage with recent events here on this campus. Bree Andrus, one of our young Manship alums, working hard at Channel 2, WBRZ, as a sports anchor and reporter. Catherine Terrell, big shout out to Catherine, who's been working with ESPN and NFL Nation covering the New Orleans Saints. Mr. Alex Restrepo, he's still in the room with us. Thank you, Alex, for your time today. Senior Director of all of social media for both the Saints and the Pelicans down in New Orleans, and we appreciate you and your support. Dr. Josh Jackson and myself, Professor Chad Sabbaty, we also want to give a shout out to our academic scholars, Dr. Julie Richmond from Rowan University, Dr. Betsy Emmons from the University of Nebraska, and Dr. Sean Saudry, if he's still here, from that Tuscaloosa-based university. What do they call it? Alabama, University of Alabama. But they were fantastic. It's been a fun day. And for those who were with us last year, a lot of our students remember the conversation and the great panel that we had on NIL. Of course, so much has changed just within the past year. And instead of having a huge panel, we wanted to make this session more interactive, more fireside chat, because we want to hear from y'all just as much as we want to hear from our great industry experts. But let me first introduce one of our own, a two-time Manship grad, Miss Olivia Nuss, sports contract attorney, who had spent the past few years working with the agency Student Athlete NIL. Olivia, welcome back. It's great to have you here at Manship once again.
Thank you so much.
And Ms. Taylor Jacobs has always been a friend of the Manship School and advocating for our student athletes on this campus. Taylor has been with the university for more than 10 years now, specifically as the Associate Director of all things NIL and Strategic Initiatives with LSU Athletics. Taylor Jacobs, everybody. What we'd like to do, Olivia and Taylor, is just kind of start with some general thoughts of where do we stand now here in late October, fall of 2025. Since its inception 4 years ago with NIL, so much has changed with collectives and obviously revenue sharing and payments. How much have things evolved just in this short period of time? However y'all would like to start us off here in 2025.
Sure, I'll kick it off. So I was actually talking with someone earlier today, and they always ask in any kind of interview setting, what is your day-to-day like? No day is the same, quite literally, because NIL changes what feels like every 5 minutes. We obviously, in July 1 of 2021, the laws passed to allow student athletes to engage in NIL. At that time, we were a little bit more restricted as to what we could do as far as the institution goes. Transparently, institutions probably pressed the limit a little bit as to how involved we could be to then maybe write that narrative a little bit more to allow us to be more involved. That has grown exponentially, which I'm sure we'll talk about throughout this. And then July 1 of 2025, we implemented revenue sharing. So majority of my time now is really focused on revenue sharing because we've taken on all of that within NILSU. Which is a completely different mindset. I go back and forth with agents every day. We're negotiating contracts directly between us and the athlete and their representative. So I miss the days of just being able to focus on the fun educational events that Olivia and I created way back in the day. However, we're rocking and rolling, and just we don't sleep as much now.
So I'll just start by giving some context. So Taylor was my first boss when I was still in law school and we were still navigating general NCAA compliance. So when I started my career in NIL, we were really coming up with, okay, the Alston decision is out. Okay, student athletes can capitalize on their personal name, image, and likeness rights. What does this mean? What does this look like for our state legislation? What does this look like for educating our student athletes? And then I, shortly after, took a position with a company called Student Athlete NIL, which was the largest basically agency consulting with NIL collectives. So we didn't own the NIL collectives, but mainly boosters and donors who propped up these LLCs to take in money and maybe didn't know how to manage it correctly or thought it was going to be a part-time job, quickly learned that it is a full-blown service agency. And so they would hire my company to come in and do everything from the negotiation of contracts, which was mainly my role, to the the athlete management piece with deliverables and organizing fulfillment of those deliverables, all the way through to the production and the advertising of most of those campaigns. And so my business really went through 3 transitions. First, as sort of a consultant and a navigator of what is this NIL space and how is an NIL collective supposed to function with, or in partnership with, a university, and how can we support what the university is doing without crossing some of those lines, like Taylor said. The second transition was really where we started taking on an advisory role. And many of the student athletes would come to us for brand building, with ideas for campaigns. We were servicing the local, regional, and national sales markets for a lot of brands that maybe wanted to get into the NIL space but didn't really understand how to interact with student athletes. So a lot of our advising actually came in from the brand side as well. And then the third most recent transition is post House versus NCAA settlement. Revenue sharing begins July 1, and most of the universities say, well, you know what, we can probably figure this out ourselves. We can hire internally. We can create this system and process that you guys have been consulting and advising on. And so my work basically went from negotiation of athlete contracts with their representation to now helping universities and their general counsels navigate what have you guys been doing for the past 3 years and how can we make it happen ourselves. And so over the course of my time at Student Athlete NIL, I've worked with 56 different universities. I've negotiated over 130 million in NIL deals. And all of a sudden, as soon as these universities decide we can take this in-house and do it ourselves, our jobs go away. And so my company is actually effectively shutting down and winding down operations now that most of the universities are taking it in-house. So talk about a serious transition from last year when we were on this panel until now.
Taking on a strong workload, but also a strong opportunity to best support our student athletes on this campus. And Taylor, you've seen it, Olivia, you've seen the success stories, but there's a lot of misconception out there that everyone's having these giant endorsement deals and the lucrative process. What can you speak to the fact that of the hundreds and thousands of student athletes out there, it really is the small minority that receives the big headlines and the big attention?
Yeah, so something that let's also level set, right, and that you guys should be aware of when thinking about NIL. So there's true third-party marketing NIL. That is student athlete partners with Powerade to be featured in their commercial. So that is student athlete to third-party brand. Now there's revenue sharing, which is university to athlete. There has been collective to athlete, which Olivia said it best last year, is kind of like synthetic NIL. So there's all these different avenues for athletes, and I think it's really important that you look at each of them, right? So in looking at true third-party marketing, a lot of things go into effect there, because at the end of the day, the brand is trying to determine their ROI. What is going to be the return on my investment, and do I really need to work with this athlete? That's why you will see it's often the starting quarterback, the Livy Dunns, who have millions and millions of followers, Flau'jae Johnson, millions and millions of followers. But here, specifically at LSU, what we've built within NILSU is to try to teach the athletes how to build that platform to capitalize. So you probably see more athletes getting involved in the space because of the resources that we're providing to them. But yes, to your point, the true third-party space is a smaller percentage of athletes, because at the end of the day, the brand is still trying to say, well, is this athlete going to be someone that we want to work with? Now, when you look at revenue sharing, dependent upon how each university, because every university has the decision as to what they're going to revenue share and with who and up to how much, that's also going to be a new thing, right? It's not necessarily about, can this athlete come get revenue share? Well, they might not be able to, because if that particular university, the institution, is not offering revenue share opportunities to that athlete's sport, then it's just simply not available. So you're going to start to see that fluctuate as well.
I will say, to answer your question, I think the source of confusion really comes from that delineation between third party and revenue sharing. I think a lot of the times the misconception is, revenue sharing means that athletes are being paid to play. That's absolutely not true. The NCAA still has a prohibition on pay to play, right? What they are getting is a percentage of that media money that comes in from TV contracts, et cetera, and they are allowed to revenue share with their student athletes up to $20.5 million, which increases a little bit percentage-wise over 10 years annually. And so when you look at the Arch Mannings of the world, they're still going to likely be making seven figures. Perhaps that comes from the revenue share more than it does through third-party NIL, because the NIL collectives have effectively been subsidizing what the universities couldn't do for years now. And so that revenue sharing for the top athletes is still going to be, six figures, and then you have that supplemented by third-party NIL. Now, what does this mean for the second, third string team members? I think that looks like really doing what Taylor's doing and teaching them how to build their brands, because effectively, if you go to a school and you're a walk-on, they're not going to give you a massive amount of revenue sharing, most likely, hypothetically. And so you are going to have to do the work and put in the work to build your personal brand if you actually want third-party deals to come your way. And it's just like any other college student on campus at that point, right? Any other college student can make a TikTok, build a following, and go out and monetize their name, image, and likeness. So it's essentially the same concept there.
Look, on that note, name, image, and likeness, NIL, is no different than influencer marketing.
Correct.
It is influencer marketing. That is another misconception, is people will often say, well, how is NIL different from what I used to do on social media? It's not. I literally just work with like 500 little influencers now. It is influencer marketing. That's what it is. Just college athletics has coined the term NIL.
Yeah.
And we want today's session to be as interactive as possible, so please raise your hand. We want to hear from our students. We want to hear from our professionals, from our visiting guests and scholars as well. Mr. Andon, if you'd like to stand up, tell our guest who you are and your question, sir.
I'm Andon Brabham. I'm a senior on the journalism track here. This question's for Taylor in particular. How do you balance the idea of protecting an athlete from a brand or a business that may be particularly harmful to them, while still building up a cohesive relationship for them and giving them enough options? Because a lot of the time you see, a player be upset that they're not getting a certain deal, even though that deal may not be the best for them. Just talk about the balancing of that.
That's a great question. So as student athletes come onto campus, we always lay a groundwork of, one, we're never going to force you to do an NIL deal that you don't want to do. Two, you always have the decision to say yes or no. At the end of the day, it's your brand, and our student athletes will often hear us say, like, you have to be authentic to you. If you don't eat cheeseburgers, you shouldn't do the cheeseburger deal, because that's not authentic to who you are. So we're having those conversations with them even when they come as recruits. Like, that's something that we say in the recruiting presentation. So when a brand comes to me with an opportunity and I'm taking that to the athlete, I would say 9 times out of 10, the athlete says, well, what do you think about this deal? And what would you do? And so we often are trying to present them with non-biased things to think about, because I don't want them to feel like we're making the decision for them. And I do want them to feel like they have the autonomy and the power in their own brand to make that decision, and just making sure we're providing them with all of the holistic facts, right? Like, what is this brand? What do I think? Well, historically, they've kind of had a bad reputation about how they engage in this space. However, they have a new president and a new CEO, so they might be moving forward and they might be impacting change, and that's in fact what this campaign's about. So do you want to attach your name to that? I think really it's important that we over-communicate with them and make sure we're providing, all of the things to think about. Because again, you will never hear me try to force an athlete into a deal. It is their decision at the end of the day. And I've had some that I'm like, oh, this is a partner of LSU, and like, I really need you to take this deal, but okay, you don't want it. So like, I have to go back to the partner. And that's also tricky in my position, is where I'll have to go back and say, hey, the athlete doesn't want to work with you, but let's pivot and let's try to find another athlete. So it can be tricky at times, and it is a delicate balance, especially in the position of my relationship with the athlete and my relationship with our partners or the businesses that have worked with us historically. So again, over communicating on both ends, making sure that both parties understand full and well why, maybe why the athlete said no, or what the athlete needs to be thinking about when they're making the decision.
And over this past 4-year cycle, a quick question just about student athletes' education or awareness. Obviously, those that were starting high school 4 years ago are now here in college, and they've kind of grown up with these opportunities. Have you all found that they are more aware of these type of opportunities and inherent knowledge of what lies ahead?
I can start there. So from a national perspective, you're seeing more athletes ask more proactive questions. So now that we've had NIL for about 4 years, when we present a contract to an athlete, I often used to get questions from a parent or an agent is pretty typical, but now I'm actually seeing a lot of these athletes proactively ask questions about legal language that they don't understand in the contract. And certainly my role is to say, seek legal counsel, hire an agent, get a professional to look at whatever you don't understand. We certainly don't want you signing anything you don't understand. But really taking the initiative to educate themselves about what they're committing to before they get into it. And I think, I remember being with Taylor. Taylor and her team always did a very good job of saying, guys, you need to look at the contract. You need to know what the time commitment is. You really need to know what you're signing up for. Is it 10 appearances? Do you have time to do 10 appearances with your fall football schedule? When are they going to require you to attend them? Is it going to be an hour away from where you live? Like, all of those things are factors that they have to take into consideration. And I find a lot more athletes are taking the initiative themselves.
I think too, when we started in the recruiting presentation, deer in headlights, right? Everyone just kind of looked and was like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of information, but this is really cool that y'all launched with a billboard in Times Square. Like, cool. Now, like, I sat with a parent last Saturday and spent an hour after the presentation with this parent who just asked questions because they're more prepared and they've seen more stories and they know more of what to ask. And I think NIL, truthfully, back in the day, in the recruiting experience, it consisted of, facilities and academic resources that the institution provided. Now, 9 times out of 10, one of the top things that recruits will ask about is their NIL opportunities and NIL experiences.
Thank you. Sam, you have a question?
Hi guys, I'm Sam Terrio. I am wanting to be in the exact same position that you are one day, Ms. Nuss. I'm looking to go into sports law, and with the new NIL opportunities, I feel like it's one of the best fields for me to go into. My main question is, you kind of left us on a cliffhanger there with how the student athlete NIL company that you've been a part of for the past 3 years is, disbanding and, going into a new role. So my question for you is, what's next?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So I think I'll answer your question generally first about going into sports law. Sports law is just different areas of the law within sports, and I think that's a major misconception. And what I will say is my path was extremely unique in that I had an amazing opportunity with Taylor and LSU Athletics. I actually started in LSU Athletics as a bat girl for the baseball team, and then I took a role in marketing after I was a bat girl, and then after that, I knew folks in the NCAA compliance office, and so I knew I could get class credit in law school, and I jumped right in. And so athletics always made me feel at home. And so when I went searching for my first job, I knew I was really passionate about the legal work, but I knew I wanted to remain internal either with a company or at a university, and the legal work was really important to me. And so I fell into this role because I was actually in a joint JD Masters in Mass Comm program for you students thinking about it. It's a wonderful program. LSU Law and the Masters in the Mass Communication School will work together to come up with a joint program for you to graduate on time, be able to take the bar, and also get your master's. I wrote my entire master's thesis on NIL. And so in the middle of that NCAA compliance externship, I was also writing my thesis. I was also active on Twitter and LinkedIn. My best advice generally for getting into the space is find something you're passionate about within the space and write about it. It's really important to have a presence online. It's almost essential now, especially for people who are recruiting and doing legal recruiting, and law firms likes to see writing. But again, sports law is generally the different practice areas applied to sports. So even if you are with a law firm, you can certainly do work in the sports and entertainment business, because what I do at its core is contract negotiation, right? So whatever the subject matter of the contract is, that's my skill set. Oh, so what's next? So right now, I am in a transition period. I've been doing a lot of teaching, and generally, I think either I will return to a firm or I will look for another opportunity internally within the NIL space. There are so many different opportunities in the NIL space that I've gotten calls on. I have one company that reached out. It is an AI company that allows for filtering of abuse of athletes online, which is a topic we talked about, I think, in the last panel, how much hate student athletes actually receive online, and how do we prevent some of that at such a young age. Other companies are using AI tools to build out an initial legal analysis of a contract. So where some athletes don't have affordable counsel that they can hire, perhaps they can use an AI education tool and have an initial legal review of a document. And so lots of different ideas, lots of different industries coming into NIL that are definitely attractive at this point in time.
Thank you. We have a question here in the back. Skylar, please stand up.
Hey, I'm Skylar. I'm traditionally on the music side of journalism, but thankfully I've had Dr. Josh Jackson to teach me about sports and a lot about the women in sports. So have you guys faced any difficulties as women in the ever-changing NIL space?
Yeah. Honestly, the hardest thing, so right before I took over NIL, I had my first child. That transition has been the hardest, being a mom and still trying to climb this ladder, because Monday night, this Monday? Yeah, my days are running together. I was up here until 8 o'clock at night because we had a photo shoot. I try really, really hard to balance being able to be present as a mom and be in this space. And the athletics world in general, NIL, a lot of this is so fast paced that you almost have to always be available. And it's something that I'll talk to, my team about all the time. They know there are times where I'm not coming to this because I have to go be present with my family. And not everyone in this industry supports that or believes in that. Thankfully, at LSU and with LSU Athletics, we have an incredible leadership that does support that and has allowed me to really grow in that within myself. But I have worked for people, and I know of other people who are working for people who just don't have that same thought process. And respectfully, that's fine. But it's hard out here trying to mother these two heathens over here and also mother my 500 athletes. In 2 years, my little boy has his kindergarten interview, and it's the most stressful time of my life. So I think that's been really hard. I also think just taking that out of the equation and being a female in sports, you're seeing a lot more women in the space. Now more than ever. To any of my female friends in the room, if you are looking to get into college athletics, there are so many incredible women to learn about and to look after. Some of whom all have come through LSU Athletics, and I've been able to learn from. The list of people that I have that I've simply been able to learn from here is incredible. But it's not without its challenges, and you do run into, sometimes you can all be sitting at the table and everyone's gonna not look at the female at the table. But then sometimes you're in spaces where we're looking at the female leadership because that's who's in that role, and she's the wisest in the room. So again, I think it's really about, not necessarily about how hard it is in the industry, but knowing who you're working for and what they are going to support and what they're going to value. That's allowed me to really grow and thrive. And thankfully here, it's all been really positive and really great.
My first experience in athletics was with the marketing director here at LSU Athletics at the time, who was female. She was wonderful. And then my second job in LSU Athletics was with Taylor. And so I've been very fortunate to have strong female leadership roles modeled for me as I've gone through growing into my professional career. And what I will say about my job for the past 3 years is our founder actually hired a leadership team of all women. So my first role was, the marketing director was female, my COO was female, our CFO was female. And I will say the discrepancy seems to be going away, especially as the world widens and these startups continue to develop. My job was entirely remote. However, I will say, especially in contract negotiations, I run into a lot of male counterparts who say, I've been doing law longer than you've been alive. And that holds some weight sometimes, right? But certainly what I have found and tried to foster in my negotiations is a mutual respect and a mutual understanding. And especially from the legal side, when you're in a negotiation, you have to remember that each party is bringing what they need to the table, and it's all about finding a mutually acceptable solution. And so I've just always tried to foster the idea of mutual respect. And if you're in an environment where you're not feeling mutually respected, that I encourage you to get out of that environment and find one, because they are there and they do exist.
Thank you. We have another student question here. Jada?
Hi, my name is Jada Ferris. My question is kind of more about NIL and recruiting. We kind of saw it last year with Bryce Underwood, and just kind of like the talks of money and whether that was a factor if he was going to come here or go to Michigan, and then how he ended up going to Michigan ultimately for the money. Is that something that you guys are seeing more often, and is it causing more problems for your department and for recruiting across all sports?
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges with NIL has been recruiting for a number of reasons. One, we battle that, right? We battle that now we're fighting against who's going to have the biggest offer, when that's not even really what NIL is supposed to be. So for the institutions who truly are trying to do it right, or just in general, when you're trying to navigate that conversation, it can be difficult. But also, the misconception in that space is also very difficult, right? Because every day, all of our coaches call me and they're like, well, this school has this amount of money and this school has this amount of money. And I'm like, how do you even know that? You don't even know anyone that works there. Like, you're making this up. You read something on Twitter and that doesn't mean it's true. So we, as administrators, I have to keep my coaches happy. And at the end of the day, I can't just continue to say, that's not real. Like, we have to go try to actively get information and properly educate not only our athletes, but our coaches in the space as well. So that also creates a lot of conflict, right? Like, coaches are getting to the place where they're like, well, this school has this and that school has this and they had this. So we're competing with the actual Michigans of the world who are taking recruits, but also just like the internal battle with the coaches and what they need. So it's been tough to navigate. Also, add on to that the different state laws, right? Every state has different legislation. So schools in the state of Florida can do different things than we can do here. And schools in the state of Texas can do different things than we can do here. The international student component is a really big thing. Some schools have decided they're going to pay international athletes. Some schools are saying no because it's going to be a violation of their visa. So my Olympic sport coaches who heavily recruit in the international spaces are mad that we might not be getting as involved when the attorneys are telling me, no, don't do it. So the recruiting aspect of NIL is the most, probably in my opinion, the most stressful component of it and the most difficult to navigate.
I'd have to say the same. And my experience has not only been university-wide, but coach against coach. So men's basketball versus football, men's basketball saying, well, football has this much money and men's basketball only has this much money. Like, how are you going to make this better for my team? And so I see a lot of internal struggles as well in those dynamics. And then again, the international piece is a huge and very under-researched topic, specifically in college sports. I am not an immigration attorney, but we definitely had one as outside counsel on every single matter. And her advice to us was basically that student athletes on F1 visas have 3 modes where they can actually work and produce income, and that is on-campus employment, OPT, and CPT, which are curricular training basically during and after for like internships. Outside of that, there is no work allowed in order to get paid, right? So any active work that is done by a student athlete outside of those 3 approved methods is considered a violation of their F1 visa, in this attorney's opinion. And you will find many attorneys that differ on this opinion and want to find loopholes and, you know, teeter on the lines of active versus passive. And I think the message has consistently been, we don't have a good answer. So they assume that whatever's not active work can be done passively, and they can get things like royalties, right? They can get money through passive opportunities where they don't have to perform any work in order for it to be done. But I think the opinions of most general counsels, especially on the revenue sharing side, is we're not going to take on that risk as a university. And what is the risk to the university? Definitely shutting down an international athlete program, not only athletes, but international students programs. They have to be heavily regulated to even host international students. And then second, to the athlete is subject to deportation, right? And there's no review. There's a concept in the law, it's called consular non-reviewability. So the student athlete goes in front of a consular officer, and that consular officer is trained maybe 6 months to a year in international law in order to become a consular officer and review visa status. And they basically can deny or approve visa status for any reason or no reason at all. And these reviews happen when the student athlete goes in for a renewal or a change in visa status. So they could have done an NIL deal and posted on their social media 6 months ago. Consular officer sees that pop up as a headline or sees it on their social and goes, yep, you're done. No evidence, no review, nothing. And so it's a major risk to international student athletes, and I think the risk isn't being properly communicated to the athlete themselves, especially when you're handed $10,000 for a promotion with a brand. It's hard to pass up when you're already having all of these expenses for coming overseas and studying. So I think it's an extremely under-researched part of NIL.
And we have a question here in the back. Here you go.
Hi, my name is Sydney. I'm actually one of the MassCom ambassadors here today. And so my question is just more of like an insight. I know you said both y'all have like advised and work closely with different athletes of like negotiating contracts. I just want to know what it's like for maybe some of those students that haven't had such large success with getting NIL deals and things like that, and if you've like kind of observed any of like pressures or anything or expectations that's kind of been put on athletes now because things are getting so much larger, and because I feel like a growing part of the game is how much followers you have or how much like presence you have on social media. So like how is that affecting pretty much all athletes?
Yeah. I'll start. So again, yes, there is this expectation of, oh, I'm a student athlete, it's time for me to go make money. It's not always the case. When we're meeting with them and recruiting and when they first come on campus, that is also something that we will often say is like, hey, let's level set here, okay? Check your social media, like respectfully, check yourself. Like, are we marketable to the tune of however many thousands of dollars, or do we really need to focus on building your brand, and what does that look like? I will often, and my staff, when we're meeting with athletes, do you even like social media? Do you like creating content? And if they say no, then like respectfully, we probably don't need to try to pursue NIL, because 99% of the opportunities that come through the space are on social media. Don't fool yourself and don't force yourself into it, because if it feels forced and the brands can tell it feels forced, the content doesn't feel as authentic. Your followers and the brands that you work with aren't going to be as pleased because it's going to feel fake, and people don't like fake content. So it can be tough conversations. I think you saw it if anyone watched the documentary. Aaliyah in that show, she's our track student athlete. She was in my office all the time. She had a ton of social media followers. She loved creating content, and she came to us and was like, hey, I am a potential Olympic athlete. Like, I should be able to capitalize on this. But she had to work a little bit harder than some of the other student athletes did. But she did because she wanted to, and she put in the time, and she hustled, and she was meeting with us pretty much weekly during that time. And she's now since capitalized on a brand. But it can be hard conversations. I guess all of that to say is that let's level set. Not everyone's just coming here and getting money, unless you're on revenue share. That's a different conversation. But not everyone's just coming here and getting money. And you have to be willing to put in work if you want to engage in the third party space. If you're not willing to do that, this is fun. Like, it was a great conversation, but we probably need to pivot.
Yeah, and again, that's true NIL, right? And so I've been playing on the other side of this, which was NIL collective deals, where essentially we would pay a student athlete to be available for brands for 6 months to a year and be able to use those sub-licensing rights with brands that wanted to advertise either on a team-wide scale or a school-wide scale. A lot of our actual brand campaigns were group licensing deals because they saw value in numbers. And sometimes you have a star player who's absolutely phenomenal and can get on and turn it on behind a camera, and then other guys are really struggling to even film the content once and get it right. And so I think revenue share is an entirely different category in itself, and frankly shouldn't be called NIL because it's revenue share. And a lot of those contracts, I've seen probably a dozen of them now. Some of them have active deliverables incorporated in them, like autograph signings or appearances. Others are just payment for passive use of NIL, right? And for a lot of athletes, that's possibly the solution. But unfortunately, you're seeing 95% of that money going to men's basketball and football. So what happens to the golf guys who maybe don't have the brand and don't have the revenue share money? That's the percentage of athletes that we really haven't addressed yet. Is, do you even build a brand for those athletes that are interested? And if you do, how do you get them to feel comfortable behind a camera and filming content? Because, athletes don't have to participate in NIL.
We have a question from one of our manship staff members, Mr. Kyron Lewis. Kyron.
Thank you. Hello. So what would y'all say is y'all's favorite part about what y'all do? It's like kind of like a loaded question, but like, what keeps you motivated with, oh, I have to navigate this contract, I have to deal with this person, I have to do this, I have to do this. So what keeps y'all motivated to like continue showing up and doing the work?
I'll take this one first. I think what motivates me and what has motivated me for the past 3 years is the problem-solving aspect of my job, because like Taylor said, it changes every single day. Even yesterday, the College Sports Commission hired a former federal prosecutor to step in and start regulating NIL Go, which is the third-party system of essentially making sure that NIL deals are authentic. And so, I mean, that is brand new. And like I said, I'm leaving my job, but I'm still tuned in, writing articles. I'm active on Twitter, and it's really a passion. So I think it comes down to passion, interest, and a passion for education at the end of the day, and making sure that people are getting good information about the space. So in some level, it's the frustration of misinformation that's keeping me going at this point, because as somebody who's been very ingrained at a national scale with this issue, it's very difficult to see people online or even writers from very renowned publications misinform the public about what NIL really is. And so that's been my passion for the past 3 years, is really information sharing and education.
I think for me, it's still so rewarding when an athlete completes a deal, whether they got a shirt or they got paid $50,000 and they're in our office saying thank you, or they're excited to be at the photo shoot. Like, that keeps me going. Yeah, I mean, I can remember back to when one of our first athletes got one of their first like really big national NIL deals, and he came to my office and he was like, oh my gosh, that was the coolest experience. Look at what I learned. And I actually saw him not that long ago, and he was like, that actually opened so many doors for me. And at the end of the day, like, that's why I started doing this, because the student athlete experience is what I want to really try to benefit. And if this is the way that I can do that, then I'm going to do everything I can to try to make at least part of their experience the best that it can be.
One of our visiting guests has a question. Mr. Alex Restrepo, on behalf of the Saints and Pelicans.
Hi. I wanted to ask, how much of the deals are the brands coming to y'all or to the athlete, or the athlete going to the brand? And then kind of related is, how much do y'all get of, like, these are very competitive people, and they see athletes getting other deals. How much of that is like, how much do y'all hear of, how do I get that? Or what is that person doing differently that I'm not getting, kind of thing?
Okay, so the second part of your question, I would say probably more often than not, we get the how do I get that? I think once we can really sit down and have education with a student athlete and talk them through the process, to, again, what we'll always say is, like, you're not necessarily going to just get that, because let's look at all the comparables, right? Like, your social media might not be equivalent, your playtime, you might be in a different spot on the roster. What is that going to look like? But how can we help you find something and craft something for you and an opportunity that's really going to be more authentic to you? Again, the more we can be in front of the athletes having these conversations, I think is what helps them to have more realistic expectations of NIL. So we do have a lot of those conversations, but we've also been able to navigate it through that. Will you say the first part of your question again?
How much of the deals are the brands
Coming, or the athletes going to the brand? For speaking for us, our answers might be different, but we launched NILSU Max last spring, which really in theory is like the agency that lives within us. So they're going out and sourcing deals for athletes and trying to bring businesses and brands to our student athletes. So I would say ours truly is probably like 50-50. We bring in a ton, but the athletes, we're also actively teaching them to go pitch deals on their own. We'll often tell an athlete, like, we're going to have a better chance of getting you connected with a brand if you're pitching and we're pitching, right? At the end of the day, hopefully at least some point someone will respond. So we are trying to teach them to pitch, because I think that's important, but I think that's just important for their professional development in general. So we're probably 50-50. I don't know.
I would say on our side, because we were an external consulting agency, it was a lot of the brands approaching us to work with the student athletes, because they knew we had the volume with 56 different schools. You can imagine how many different types of athletes are at those places. And so as far as demographics, we were really priding ourselves in the consulting work we were doing, especially with our sales force and doing all of the analytics on reach, follower base, demographic research, so we could present all of those things to a brand and say, what exactly are you looking for? Because here are the stats that we have. And so I would say it depends on the type of deal, right? Because we did both. We did NIL collective deals, and we did brand sponsorships that were really interested in working for the student athletes. So we had both sides. I would say my answer's similar in that it's 50-50. I was not in the business of agent representation or athlete representation, but as far as my business is concerned, it was definitely 50-50. Now the NIL collective side, it was mostly regional and local engagement, whereas the brand side, it was national brands approaching us to work with the collective of student athletes that we have. So for example, Lululemon was big on the national brand side with us. They came in every year to our NIL summit and did a major activation and got over, 100 million eyeballs when it was all said and done. Now with a local brand, so for example, the local burger joint, they're looking for 1 to 2 athletes or maybe 6 or 7 athletes to come in and do an autograph signing or an appearance at their restaurant, or maybe even a photo shoot. So I would say it depends on the brand's objective as to what kind of student athletes they're picking, but definitely worked on both ends of that.
We have a question here in the middle. Skylar again.
So it was actually brought to my attention this morning by Dr. Emmons that with the rise of social media, a lot of athletes, like you said, don't feel comfortable broadcasting their lives like that. So are there any protocols that you guys go through to still help those athletes feel included if they don't necessarily want to put their lives on social media?
Yeah, so when we start meeting with athletes, what our staff will do, we have these one-on-one brand meetings. My staff's actually in the back. Shout out NILSU. We have these one-on-one branding meetings, and in those initial conversations, that's where we're asking, are you comfortable on social media? If yes, okay, what kind of content do you like to create, and how can we build partnerships off of that specific content? If no, but you still want to engage in NIL, let's brainstorm of how we're going to find you opportunity in the space that might not force you into social media. Camps and clinics or community outreach type opportunities are good ones. Also, we have some athletes who don't love social media, but they're still really great in person. So it might be speaking engagements or autograph sessions or fan engagement type situations. So we try to help them navigate that first. Like, do you want to be in social media? Okay, if not, let's pivot and let's figure it out. But then again, we still meet with athletes who are like, I really don't want to do either because I'm too busy. Or we have some athletes who will meet with us and they're all gung-ho about NIL. Then they get here and after 6 months of being here, they're like, no, wait, I don't have time for this. So it's kind of understanding both of all of that. And again, I know I keep saying this, but over communicating, right? Because as a 17, 18, 19-year-old, you're coming to campus, you have this conception of NIL of like, oh, I'm just going to go to LSU and get paid. Like, they did this documentary, I'm going to get paid. But then you get here and you're like, wait. The reality of this, like, is rough out there and it's work and I have to do a lot for NIL. So I might personally say I need to take a step back. Us being there as the support and the resource to help them navigate that, I think is super important as well.
Yeah, and to answer your question, I think when you talk about NIL, everyone automatically goes to social media. But a lot of the spaces where we played were with the multimedia rights holders, partners of the university. So Taylor just mentioned NIL Max, which is through Playfly. And so Playfly and Learfield as partners of the university, they were also typically bringing us campaigns that required an entire roster of athletes for perhaps a photo shoot or whatever it is. So some of those shyer athletes that maybe wouldn't have gone out on their own now have an opportunity to do something in a group setting, which definitely eases them in. And usually I find that those athletes are the ones that are most interested in coming back and doing things again with us because they realize it kind of breaks out of their shell and they go, oh, wait, I can do this. And it doesn't have to be scary and by myself.
We have a question here with our great colleague, Dr. Josh Jackson, our mass comm, sports comm scholar.
I ain't special. Taylor, I guess this one's kind of more pointed toward you, but I think you can buy in on this too. Just with all the years that you've worked in compliance and the evolution of what compliance has been, both pre and post NIL. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to them a little bit about the bad actors, right? You've always been a person that has talked about doing things the right way and being within compliance, and we know that not everyone at every university necessarily operates in that same manner. So can you be a little transparent and talk about some of the frustrations that you've experienced both pre and post NIL when it comes to compliance and those bad actors, and then talk a little bit about the reward that you feel when you know you did things the right way and these students find these really good lucrative deals that otherwise they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I think what's been, I guess, funny for me, maybe not funny for our compliance office with NIL, in the compliance world, things really were black and white. Like, we had a rule book that you could quite literally turn to. It was about that thick back in the day. And you could quite literally turn to the page, you could point to the rule. So if a coach asked a question, yes, as compliance officers, we were always going to try to find a way to get to a yes to help our coaches. But at the end of the day, if the rule says, no, you can't do it, we can point to that and say, you can't do it. We don't have that in NIL. Like, it is the most gray space. And when people say the wild, wild west, it quite literally, like, I'm fighting for my life out here. So I think it's always been important to LSU. I mean, some of our core values within the athletic department, right? We strive for excellence. We're going to do everything with integrity, authentic, and we take that approach to everything. So for us specifically, continuing to, yes, be the support that our coaches need and try to get them to the answer that they want has been great. But at the end of the day, also as administrators, we have to be the ones protecting our coaches. They might be more willing to push a button, but like when you see your friend get in a fight or they're about to get in a fight, but like you have to be the best friend that's there kind of holding them back. Like, yeah, I'm going to like help you throw bows a little bit, but like I'm also going to hold you back so that we don't get arrested. Yeah, like that kind of has to be us sometimes. So I think in this space now, I guess to answer your question, there's a little bit of like, haha, I told you so, whenever like an article comes out and I can text, one of our coaches and be like, did you see this? Because you tried to get me to do this last week and look, now these people are in trouble. But at the end of the day, like, whether we're in compliance or NIL, we as LSU Athletics, we want to do everything with integrity, and we want to do it right. And we want people to look back at us, and especially now me with NILSU, if anyone's talking about NIL at LSU, like my name's somehow Googled in that too. So I want us to do it the right way. And I want to be, I want to push the limits. Like I'm here to try all the new things. I'm here to push the limits. I'm here to push the boundaries, but let's do it right and let's do it well. And I think that that's important. And being the example in the space, I want to be the person that people look to and say, she pushed the limits, but she always did it right. It was always clean. They did it well, rather than, oh, well, did you hear about that person? That person got fired because of X, Y, and Z. Like, I don't want to be that. So just trying to set that example, I think that's going to be really important as the CSC gets even more involved with everything. Like, I do think there's going to be more black and white eventually. When we pray. Their new, like Olivia mentioned, their new enforcement person. Hopefully she's going to come in and crack a whip. But truthfully, I'm anxiously, like, please give us more boundaries, give us more rules, help us rein it in a little bit, because that'll just be easier for us in the space.
Yeah, and I think it's important to think about this context. I struggle with it because as an attorney, you have these state laws in place, and then you have NCAA rules and regs, which are not law, right? These organizations voluntarily opt into following NCAA rules, and when they're challenged by legal concepts, that's where you get the gray area, and that's exactly how NIL happened, right? So if you look at the Alston case, NCAA rules were challenged because essentially before 2021, right, you signed away your personal name, image, and likeness rights as a student athlete. You weren't allowed to capitalize on them. You couldn't receive so much as a sandwich for a social media post, right? And so this was challenged under federal antitrust law, and not to get too in the weeds of the law part of it, but I think it's important. Antitrust is founded on the values of creating a fair and equitable market without restraint of trade, right? And so what is the NCAA doing by monopolizing use of every athlete's name, image, and likeness? They're creating a restraint of trade. And that is what you're seeing challenged over and over again right now. And I have to agree with Taylor. I hope we get more stability. There are several federal pending bills right now that could solve that issue. But there's a lot of different directions it can go. And so as far as NCAA rules and regs, when we first got NIL, when I was with Taylor, I think the 3 rules that the NCAA put out were no pay for play, no recruiting inducements, and you can get paid by third parties for your name, image, and likeness.
But the institution couldn't pay the athlete.
The institution could not pay the athlete. So those were the only rules that we had at that point, right? And then you've got House versus NCAA, which is a settlement that created essentially 3 things that happened. So there was back damages for all of the athletes during the period of 2016 to 2021, and then you have the go forward rules. Universities can pay athletes directly, so there's a rule change there. And on top of that, you have a system that is now built out called the College Sports Commission that is responsible for evaluating every third-party NIL deal above $600 for fair market value, for pay or association, and for valid business purpose. So not only are they looking at, is this a valid business purpose and is this considered fair market value for the deal, they're also looking at who's paying the athlete now. Are they a booster or a donor that has given over $50K in the last 10 years to the university? Is it a business owned by that booster or donor? And what is fair market value for this particular deal? If you're going to pay a student athlete $100,000 to show up for one appearance, is that considered fair market value? So the CSC is still trying to figure out what their standards are going to be. And I think, when we were at our height with student athlete NIL, we submitted our deals in July and didn't hear back until September for some of them. I think that will change, and that will get better as they continue to learn the landscape.
I think on that note too, what we talk about, and I have been vocal in the space about this, but how can you truly determine what a business thinks is fair market value, right? Yeah. I had my own social media deals at one point in time back in the day when I had time for it. I worked with 2 different companies who paid me 2 very different rates for the exact same deliverables because they had different marketing budgets. One could afford me at this higher rate. Another one couldn't, but I liked the company, so I agreed to do it. And that's something that I think is going to be challenging moving forward in this fair market space is how can you truly put one valuation on an athlete, right? It's truly more about like the business evaluation too. And I think that's going to get tricky. I think we've seen it a little bit, and I think it's going to continue to get a little bit tricky because we haven't had a deal denied yet. But I've talked to colleagues in the space who are saying that now, as denials are coming, that's when athletes and agents are going to start pushing back, being like, why do you think I'm not worth this? I've done X, Y, Z. I have these number of social media followers. Why can you be the person to say I'm not worth this? If this business thinks I'm worth it, then that means that's my market value. And I don't really disagree with that. So I think it's important that they're looking at who the payor is and where the funds are coming from. However, it's getting tricky. To monitor that.
Yes, and we've definitely had authentic third-party brand deals challenged for what is the fair market value? What are you actually paying this athlete? To me, the CSC was put in place to really weed out the third-party booster and donor bad actor deals. That was always the intention. Whether subliminally or publicly, I think College Sports Commission was set up to regulate NIL collective and booster deals. And if knowing that that was the purpose behind it, why are we arbitrarily arguing over whether a Nike deal should be $100K or $50K for an athlete? If true NIL is the goal, the true NIL deals should not be subjected to the same fair market valuation as a booster or a donor deal. And so that's where we're really running into issues. And I think that's where you're going to see more turmoil and more litigation in the next couple of years is, do these enforcement mechanisms really work? And how are they going to implement penalties for these student athletes?
Great context and perspective. Thank you very much. We have a question here in the back, and then we'll come back up to the front.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you both so much for being here. So I am a third-year law student here at LSU, planning to work in the NIL space. And so my question is, whether it's from the legal side, the communication side, or the athletic administration side, what are things that students can do now to prepare for roles in the NIL industry?
Great question.
I would just say the more experience that you can get, the better. I mean, we lived together literally for the first year of NIL. But that being said, like, she's someone that I'm always going to go to bat for, right? And so the more experience you have and the relationships that you can build in the space is going to be super important. And I'm not just saying that at an athletic department level, right? If you know you want to get into this space, do research of, is it on a campus? Is it at a brand? Is it within a law firm? What is that space that you think you're going to be interested in? Or maybe try them all in the beginning and start to build those relationships, because this world, we're all connected. Like, I could call just about anyone at another university. At this point, I could probably call any agency. So everything's very intertwined now. So the more relationships that you have in the space, obviously, if you're producing great work and you're someone who's loyal that, you know, we can trust, will vouch for that in helping you find positions. But I think that would be my biggest thing. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. I say this often, and my staff would probably slap me in the face when I say it, but if y'all email me, I'm going to do everything I can to set a meeting with you, even though my schedule is absolute trash. But it's important to me because that is you attempting to build that relationship, right? So email people, call people, introduce yourself on LinkedIn, build the relationship so that people know who you are. Because also, I don't know if I can say this in here or not, but like, NIL is like the sexy thing right now, right? So everyone wants to work in NIL. So there's also a very big difference to me when I meet with someone and they're like, I just want to work in NIL. What do I do? Can you give me a job? And hey, I've been following y'all for a while. I've seen everything that LSU has been doing. I've researched this state law and I've researched this settlement and I learned this and that, but like, I want to get your perspective. And that to me is like, all right, you're putting in the work. Like, you want to get involved. So how can I find a spot for you on our team? And how can I try to open more doors for you? And I think that that's super important too. You can always educate yourself. Even if there's not a space within, like, our staff, for example, you can always educate yourself. You can always set up conversations. You can always ask questions, and you're going to continue to gain knowledge that way.
Absolutely. And I think from a practical side of scope of the industry right now, what I'm seeing is agencies need more help than ever navigating NIL. Most professional agencies are starting some sort of branch of NIL and college sports. You have brands that are hiring internally, usually athletic coordinators or, athlete coordinator positions. You've got universities who are certainly hiring out for NIL related positions, whether it be supporting roles or, from a legal perspective, I've seen special counsel brought in. Rutgers is a great example. They just announced that they have 2 attorneys that are coming in, and maybe not a traditional legal role, but they are special counsel and they're going to be advising on rev share deals. And then the other side of the industry is obviously, from my perspective, law firm route. If you start as an associate at a law firm, you will be doing everything. But if there's a particular interest group like sports and entertainment that you really value, make connections and inroads with those people early. And I always tell people, if you message me on LinkedIn and I don't respond, or I set a meeting with you and then I don't hear from you, I mean, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, is what my mother always says. And so I have a lot of students that'll follow up with me and say, hey, here's what I've been doing in the last 3 months. Just wanted to keep you updated and let you know, here's what I've learned about the space. And so don't feel bad to email twice or message twice and just say, hey, I just wanted to follow up and let you know, here's the job I took at the Reveille, here's what I covered, here's what I'm doing my research on. Those are the kind of things that get me engaged and really, help me understand that you're passionate and you're knowledgeable about the space.
I also want to add one more thing. This space is still new.
Yeah.
Like we feel like we're in the thick of it, but it's still very, very new. LSU sports did not have an associate AD of NIL and strategic initiatives 4 years ago, right? Like I created that. I worked and I said, okay, I want to take this on and we need to have our own department and here's what I think my title should be. And for whatever reason, they said, all right, that sounds good. So don't also be scared to try to figure out or how you can create space for you in this space, right? Like, is that at a brand who needs more NIL contact? Is it consulting? Is it what does that look like ideally that you think you want to do, and try to create it? I mean, we're all flying blind here at this point, and not every campus has a position. Not every, law firm, to Olivia's point, has a position. So don't be afraid to create it either if you feel like that's something that you think you can do.
I will say I've been doing a lot of consulting in this space, and I think my biggest problem that I run into is that most companies don't really know what they need yet. Yeah. And so if you guys are able to educate yourselves on this space and find a niche, whether it's graphic design, whether it's research, whether it's putting out a news article on a weekly basis, send them the proposal. Say, hey, here's what I'm good at. Here are my skills. Here's what I think your company could benefit from just from the research I've done.
We've got time for a few more questions, y'all. I believe we have one right here. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Bailey Walker. I'm a student of Dr. Jackson. So also I do apologize if this is a little layered, but you guys discussed how NIL has evolved over the past 4 years and continues to expand, with NIL laws now reaching high school athletes and states taking different approaches on the collegiate level. Where do you see the first real rule of order coming from, whether that's the NCAA or Congress? And furthermore, how do you see litigation shaping the process over the next 4 years? And what does that stabilization truly look like?
I can start with this one. So, like I said, the basis of most suits that you're seeing right now is antitrust, right? There are 2 pending federal bills. One's the SCORE Act and one is the SAFE Act. The SCORE Act would give the NCAA an antitrust exemption, meaning student athletes would not be able to challenge the NCAA rules under antitrust principles moving forward. That would be a big win for the NCAA, right? Because not only are you getting challenges around monetizing NIL, you're now getting transfer challenges. You're now getting eligibility challenges. The Diego Pavia case is a great example of that. You're getting challenges left and right for every NCAA rule based on restraint of trade, right? And so the NCAA, I'm assuming, is very much hoping that the SCORE Act progresses because of that antitrust exemption. And I'm sure you see it every Saturday when you watch football. They're advertising it all over, right? Because it would inherently limit the athlete's right to sue under that principle. people have opinions about that one way or the other. I do think there needs to be some level of reason and some level of rules that can be enforced. I don't know if it's a federal antitrust exemption. I think that would set athlete rights back, prior to even the NIL era. And so perhaps it's a semi-pro situation where you have negotiation and collective bargaining for certain sports. Collective bargaining can't be achieved without employee status, right? And so then you're talking about, do football and basketball get employee status to some extent and maybe collectively bargain and negotiate for terms to create some sort of stability. The other side that I think is really interesting is really just this whole concept of rev share versus NIL and the contracts that I'm seeing coming from the rev share side that look a lot more like employment agreements than licensing or use of name, image, and likeness, right? They've got red shirt provisions, they've got injury provisions, and all of a sudden you look at it and go, well, would it be worst case scenario if they had to collectively bargain? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But certainly, I am of the opinion we need stability and we need enforceable rules.
Honestly, I feel like this is like the you know how the dream, like you're running from something in a dream and you never catch it or whatever. Like, this is my life with legislation. I think that, truthfully, some federal legislation is going to happen for us to really start to see true consistency. For example, right now I'm sitting on the task force for the state of Louisiana, and we get to a place of like, well, let's talk about amending our state law, but it always comes back to, well, we could be at a recruiting disadvantage if our state law prohibits that and Texas's doesn't, and that's always going to be something that we battle. It just is, because at the end of the day, if we try to do something that really is protective, but it prohibits or it hinders what our coaches are doing in the recruiting space, ultimately that's not helping, if that makes sense. So I think the federal action is going to be important, and I'm anxiously interested to see when we might get there.
And I think, the NCAA is preparing for it, right? Again, they just hired a former federal prosecutor as the head of the College Sports Commission. So I think the hope is that we do get some sort of federal legislation that at least gives them the power back to enforce the equitable rules. I think it's a balance of athlete rights versus organizational rights, and I don't think we've quite found the balance yet.
Coming down the home stretch, thank you very much, Mr. Dillon.
Hi, I'm Dylan. I'm a senior in Mr. Sabady's class, and I'm looking to go to law school, maybe get into sports law or something like that. I guess you guys mentioned the creation of new positions with NIL. What positions, and like whether that's in law firms or just in the NIL space, could you see being created within the next 10 years or just in the near future in general? And you mentioned positions missing from law firms for like whether it's international students, and the literature there, whatnot. What positions what are those positions that you see missing in those firms?
I can start. For campuses specifically, now you're seeing schools introduce full NIL staffs, right? We've had ours in place for several years, but several SEC schools have just added NIL specific roles, NIL specific staffs. You're starting to see a lot more like general manager type roles, managing the revenue share on campuses. Those are popping up more and more. Even specific sports having general managers that then work with like the lead general manager or NIL staff. So you're starting to see a lot of that. From my perspective with the agency side, I'm dealing with the agents who are drowning in the work. So they're all looking for NIL help, and they're hiring on these like NIL kind of, I guess, newer agents or lower level, whatever legal term you call them, lower level, entry level positions that are more NIL focused, where they can truly just go focus on the marketing deal and getting the kids to the photo shoots or whatever. We at LSU help them get to their photo shoots and complete their deliverables, and I'll work with agents on that, but not every school has that. So these agencies are having to pick up that lift as well, which can be big.
Yeah, and I'll say a lot of our clients, when I say clients, I mean universities that we consulted with, there were a lot of smaller schools, right? And so where the LSUs of the world can hire out an entire staff, a lot of these smaller schools are putting it on their higher level athletic or associate athletic director to figure out. And so I can tell you many schools that we parted ways with were like, how on earth am I going to do this myself? And so a lot of that role creation, I wouldn't think traditional legal. I have found more roles being built out for the revenue share side, like Taylor said, like general managers internally, and people who really can work with a cap and understand what that means. And so you're also seeing a lot of people come in from professional sports who maybe wanted to take a step back. Because while our cap is not as sophisticated as professional sports right now, I could certainly see it going that way. And so I would say any experience is good experience. Don't feel like you have to be in college athletics in order to get a role here, because the more and more I'm seeing, they're bringing in outside professionals now from all different types of industries to consult because college is becoming professional.
Mr. Andon?
Yeah, just a second. When you just mentioned sort of the smaller school playing field, obviously NIL for some schools that have been able to play in the space that are on a smaller level, it's been able to bring them up. Schools like Tulane, SMU, schools like that. But there's also some lower level schools that it's been a detriment to them. Do either of y'all see any future legislation down the line that allows those smaller schools a little bit more of a level playing field? Because feel as though the more it develops, the more it favors those schools that have more resources and further unlevels the playing field as far as an on-field product goes.
I don't know about legislation that's going to help level set that necessarily, but I do think, to figure out the right way to say this, I think you're going to start to see some of the smaller schools almost be like those prep, like become the prep school. You know, like right now there are prep schools in the high school space. You're going to start to see some of those smaller schools become the prep schools for the individuals who aren't quite ready to go to the big leagues. And I feel like they're going to still stand to benefit from talent, just that talent understanding that, okay, I might not be financially benefiting now, but this is the step I need to take to financially benefit, if that makes sense. I think we're going to start to kind of see that level set. You know, I think you're seeing it some now, honestly, with the transfer portal and the opportunities that are there. I don't know about legislation necessarily, unless we get to a place where we truly separate like football and maybe men's basketball into like a semi-pro league and then try to keep the rest of the sports like back to the true nature of college athletics.
I would have to agree. That's right. I think they're struggling right now with the federal bills that are in front of them. I think it would be very hard to introduce some sort of federal legislation, particularly for those universities. But I can tell you, in my opinion, I think the athletes that are attending those universities are well aware of what opportunities are there. And they understand that they're not going to hit that 20.5 million cap. They know 5 million is going to be great for them, and their student athletes also recognize I'm not here just to earn money. And so I think every student athlete's different, but I am finding more and more athletes also educate themselves on, okay, the money is really not the most important thing. What are going to be my priorities? What am I going to graduate in? What am I going to go pro? Is that even realistic? Or am I going to have to find a job after this? And so all of those factors and the community that an athlete builds at a university are becoming more important again.
Very well said. And let's wrap it up with one last question, Mr. Sam.
So I kind of wanted to play into the role of attorneys in this. So I'm just a little like, I just want a little bit of a clarification. So, like, do you work with attorneys that are hired by LSU staff? Do they have attorneys for their own athletes? Like, for the big figure names? Like, what is the role of the legal staff? And I guess kind of like a follow-up to that and a bigger question about revenue sharing and collective bargaining, how soon are unions coming, man? Like, it feels like inevitable that, you know, these are going to be, you know, semi-professional athletes at some point. So how is your staff preparing for that? How are you preparing for that transition of basically representing sports athletes? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we're always preparing for the next thing, right? Before NIL, we were preparing for NIL. Even at the start of NIL, not knowing truly when revenue share would hit, we were always preparing for revenue sharing. Now the conversation is, okay, unions, collective bargaining, employment status. So we're always having conversations. I mean, it's just what we do. As far as the legal and where I'm engaging on the legal side, so we have attorneys on the athletic staff that kind of serve as our legal point. I'll work with them on contracts. Then we're submitting it to general counsel on the campus side of things. They are reviewing it, making sure things are good, or, you know, I might seek a question from our attorney in athletics, but then we have to have a meeting with general counsel. General counsel has outside attorneys that they are also consulting with, so we work with those attorneys as well. And then on my agent and contract side, I'm going back and forth with agents and attorneys all day on the contract specifically and representation of the athlete. So I'm really kind of hitting the legal aspect in a ton of ways. In fact, even sometimes now on the brand side, the brand's legal is getting involved if the athlete isn't fulfilling their deliverables. So I feel like I've been sitting in a seat where I'm kind of getting hit from all of the attorneys, which can not be fun sometimes, transparently. But there's lots of different avenues, I guess. So
yeah, similar to what Taylor said. In my agency, we dealt with brand legal. I also dealt with general counsel legal at each university and the athlete representation. I do just want to make one quick point on the athlete representation. Most agents are not attorneys. You don't have to be an attorney. You frankly don't even have to have a college degree to be an NIL agent. And I have dealt with the full spectrum of straight out of school, I played football, I can be an agent, to professional attorney and advisor, has been in the sports and entertainment space for 50 years. It depends on the size of the deal. It depends on the athlete. But what I will say is there is underrepresentation of athletes in the NIL space. And I'm very passionate about that, having seen and worked from the university side and the collective side for so long. And I'm very passionate about making sure athletes are educated about what they're actually signing. Now, as far as you mentioned unionization, and I want to address that part of your question, unionization happens when employee status happens, right? So the Johnson case is currently going through the motions. I think it's been remanded actually for fact finding, but it's a really interesting case. It's Johnson versus NCAA, and it argues, why shouldn't athletics recognize student athletes in particular roles as employees? They tell them when to show up for practice. They tell them what to wear, what they have to eat, when they work out. There's certain tests for employment status, and one of them is the control test that measures all of these aspects. But when you get that, and when you get a judge who's convinced that, yeah, maybe football players should be treated like employees, then you get employee status, unionization, and collective bargaining. There are organizations that are already setting up to be the quote unquote collective bargaining entity of the athletes. Athletes.org is a big one right now. They basically send out an email, says sign up for our newsletter, make sure you're informed, make sure you stay in touch. So they've got this roster of athletes that they can easily reach out to and say, hey, we've been informing you this whole time, now it's happening, we're jumping in collective bargaining. And so it's going to be a long road, and I think it's going to be appealed, obviously, and so we're moving at the pace of government, but I don't think it's not a possibility.
Y'all, we want to say a huge thank you to both Olivia Nuss and Taylor Jacobs for their time here today. On behalf of all of our great students, faculty, and staff members of the Manship School, we appreciate this very insightful and informative conversation. What did y'all think, y'all? Fantastic. Taylor and Olivia, before we let you go, any final thoughts as to the road ahead? I know we've talked about it in different ways over the past hour and a half, but what you're excited about, what your biggest concern is moving forward, or just the unknown factor?
I continue to say that we are in the golden age of student athletes NIL. I do think that in 10 years, when it's heavily regulated and there are a lot more structure and rules, not to say that that's a bad thing, I think we're going to look back at this space and say, how wonderful that our athletes got to explore every opportunity. I'm hopeful that we do get rules and regs that are enforceable, and I do think that will happen. My overall statement always is that college sports is only going to benefit from NIL in the long run. I think there's a stigma around NIL that it's ruining college athletics. I think it's forcing it to evolve, and it's forcing a recorrection in this market. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with everything Olivia said. I think, it's exciting to be an athlete who couldn't even have cream cheese for my bagels because that was an extra benefit, to now being in a position where we're facilitating millions of dollars is pretty wild. I told my husband probably 6 months ago, I was like, I've got to at least be in this space like 2 more years, because I've got to live through like the true implementation of revenue share. I've got to be a part of this, because to Olivia's point, this is going in history books. Like eventually, if my kids go to college and they go to sports management or sports law, like this is going to be a conversation that they're going to be learning about, because this is quite literally game changing. So it's exciting to be a part of it as much as it stresses me out.
Stress-free, hopefully next year. All good. Taylor and Olivia Nuss, thank you so much.
Can't wait for that retirement day.
Y'all, please feel free to hang out. Coming up at 3 o'clock, Manship School alum Matt Moscona will be having his live After Further Review show, ESPN Radio Baton Rouge, right here in the Holiday Forum. But thank you again for joining us for the Manship School Sports Summit here in 2025.